Some of the things that happen to people in Dwell, pretty bad. Covered up scandals, yeah, there's a few. Abuser apologetics, yep. I'm convinced this is true, and I can't do anything about it. I don't think we really get to choose that much what we believe. Believing is the performance of what you're convinced of. Everyone sees what you appear to believe. I didn't feel like I can control that, and I like to be consistent. I eventually came to a conclusion, okay, I'm not really convinced.
Hello and welcome to Unreligiously. My name is Lauren, and today I am so excited to share the full interview of somebody who survived the church called Dwell. It was formerly known as Xenos, and it has hurt a lot of people. You guys are going to love this interview and everything that Nicholas shares, and go check out his YouTube channel as well. He shares a lot of videos about deconstruction, religion, and things like that. But this is a really great look into how a high control religious group can appear to be like a normal church. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that these types of cult-like experiences, or the experiences that would leave someone with lasting religious trauma syndrome, they're not just happening at these weird cults in a shack in the woods. They're also happening at your church down the corner. And of course, it's not all churches. Not all churches are cults. Not all religious organizations are cults. But there are some that do function this way and function in a really high control way. Well, and Xenos is one such church. And so I'm very excited for you guys to see what Nicholas has to say. I did do a deep dive on this topic. If you don't know about Xenos or Dwell, you can go check that out. That got published yesterday. So you will, be able to see everything about Xenos Dwell, interviews from other people, news coverage. But this interview with Nick really gives you such a great story into what it really is like to get sucked into one of these churches. So I'll just let you guys jump into it, and I hope you enjoy the interview.
So I'm Nick, former Dwell Community Church member. I go by Niddy on YouTube. So if you're familiar with my channel at all, that's, where you've seen me before. And if you're not, you can go over there. As for introductions, that's just basically who I am, former Dwell member, and I, run a YouTube channel where I do talk about cult dynamics, and that comes up when I review other Christian content or even other atheists that like to accuse people of being in a cult as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about what being a low-key theist meant for you back before college?
A low-key theist in my head is that kind of person who has a little bit of exposure to Christianity or the religion they grew up with in America, and they aren't devoted to it. They aren't really identified with it, right? Maybe culturally, but there is that general sense that a God exists, right? Or when there's problems in life or coincidences, you might attribute those to a God, or, oh, there was something protecting me there, right? Just a vague sense of some kind of deity being there. Or, when you hit real suffering, you think, God, why? Right? But you don't really say you know that God or do anything else to interact with that God. Yeah.
What was your introduction to Christianity like in college?
So it was actually that I went to a Mennonite college. They were willing to pay for half my ride, which was great based on my academics and a paper I wrote. But I was still a low-key theist most of that. I was required to take a fair amount of Christian classes, like Intro to the Bible, the history of Christianity, and some others. And I did learn quite a bit, but it wasn't very personal to me. Like, I went to a chapel service into a Mennonite church on and off. But neither of those things really were something I identified with or saw myself being a part of. And it wasn't until after college that I became more interested in Christianity and things of that nature. And I became more interested in it through someone that lived in the same condominiums as me. And I was coming home very late from night clubbing of all things. And they stopped me in the staircase, and because we were similar age, hi, what's going on? And then they randomly asked me, "Are you a believer?" And I'm like, "A believer in what? Like, what the heck kind of question is
Broad.
that?" Right?
Yeah.
They're like, "In Jesus, silly." I'm like, "Oh, no, And she's like, "Well, I go to this church. It's all people our age. You should come check it out." And so I was actually, pretty lonely. I had moved to that condominium after high school. And just come back from college, right? So I didn't have any real rooting or connections to anything else. And here comes along this person and their community of people. They seem kind of progressive, and I could identify with that, and they were accepting. And I just started to go more and more, and it did develop some more interest in me, and it seemed to start to answer my general sense and confusion around what a God was or how other people understand God. I, got like a prayer journal and a and a new Bible, a very cheap one, but a new Bible. And I was going to that for just a couple months, and then I got a job in Columbus, Ohio, and I moved down there with absolutely no real friends, just a loose connection from college. I went down here for a job that I somehow landed. I moved into a tiny apartment, and a friend of mine from my Mennonite school had seen some of my Facebook posts about going to this small Bible study in the Cleveland area. And they said, "Well, if you're interested in Christianity, why don't you check out this church, what formerly Xenos? Why don't you check that out? Because when I went to New Orleans for Katrina, they were there helping out too. And so I know that they have people our age going there. You should go check it out." So he gives me the email address of one of the people that goes to that church, and I emailed them, and they're like, "Yeah, come check it out." Of course, like free evangelism.
It's not usually they're coming to you. You have to go out and find them. So
right. I was a lost sheep coming home.
Yes.
In their take, right? And so this answers your question, how did I become familiar with it? And I roll up to this like frat house, but it's like a real house, right? It's not like the big expanded buildings or where it's like a dorm, but really broed out. Yeah. It's an actual like house. So if you're not familiar with Ohio State campus, there's a bunch of rental properties for sophomores and up. But they're not official Ohio State connected, but they're a housing option for lots of college students. And they're almost exclusively, most homes are rented to college students. And so I'm coming up to that, and I see this dude, just like a black leather hat, like cowboyish hat and like trench coat, smoking a cigarette. And I was kind of the goth influence a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I'll fit right in. Mm-hmm. Right. These are my people. Yeah. And so I go and I listen to the Bible study, and I see all these people my age just really invested in it, excited about it. They're asking me questions, and I, as a low-key theist, actually say, maybe God brought me here.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was part of that Christian group. I was starting to get ideologically and psychologically committed to this notion that Christianity could be true. And maybe this was another move that God was making to bring me closer to it. And so I started going. I had two gentlemen really take an interest in me, and we got coffee a couple times. And thinking back on the conversations we had about the Bible, I mean, they're kind of laughable in committed Christian circles. And so, I was talking about like Glenn Beck and Fox News as we read over Romans, right? What? Like,
I remember listening to, the like talk radio shows back in the
Yeah.
day. The churches really promoted them as well. It
Yeah,
was,
it doesn't do them any favors. Here I am going to this thing where that's not like an emphasis, right? It's pretty loose, young, excitable, people that aren't really trying to push like, we're pro-life and blah, blah, blah. No, it's not a real overt fundamentalism, right? And there's not like prim and proper dress. Everyone drinks, or could drink. Everyone could smoke, not weed, but they could smoke, right? So I'm like, oh yeah, this is a relaxed environment. I could see myself being a part of it. And I keep meeting with these gentlemen and going to their meetings. And one of the things that will happen with this church is that you'll get introduced to more and more meetings, right? And even as a seeker, I was asked to come to our CT, insider language, right? Central teaching is what they call it. And it's basically the Sunday service, but at night for young people. Okay, so it's hip, it's cool, it's out of the way of your class schedule and your day job. So why don't you come? What else are you doing? And I start going to that too. They present some basic apologetics, like here are reasons we believe this, or reasons we use to support what we already believe, which is common with a lot of apologetics. My impressions of it were that this is not only a relaxed place, but it's also an intellectual place. I'm a person who gets obsessed with like lore and like the depths of topics.
yeah.
A little bit more with philosophy lately, but definitely like religion in particular. Like I really liked the history of Christianity class I took, and these people were not afraid to go deep. Right? I don't really like superficial conversations, and so I got emotionally and mentally high off of having these esoteric, intellectual, historical, scientific, and religious discussions all centered around religion. That was a big draw. When you go to the home church meeting, which is where I started out, that's, really close, tight knit experience, right? And then you go to the central teachings, and afterwards, they hang out for a couple more hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So you go to this like 1 hour and some change thing, and then you hang out for 1 or 2 hours more after that. And sometimes you get dinner before that, right? So your social engagement just grows and grows. It's not something that when you start getting into it, you can detect as like love bombing. I don't think that's the intent of a lot of people in the group, especially the young ones. They don't really know better, but this is a normalized behavior that they're using for themselves just as much as a means to an end, right? Because people do love connection and the intrigue of a new person. And so it's just as addicting for them as it is for you to be this engaged with this group. And it's a unique experience, right? Because I could go to the mega church if I wanted to. And I did actually check out like Vineyard and a more traditional church. And I'm like, this is stale. This is dry. I'm too anonymous. And so that's a big draw for young people too, is that you do have this dynamic, closer place to develop these relationships. And people do know you by name. People show that they're excited to have you there. That was definitely different from traditional churches there.
What did it end up looking like to actually devote over 10 years of your life then to this church? I can definitely relate. I will say just first, I've moved around several times to new states throughout my life. I grew up in Minnesota and then moved to California and then moved to Colorado.
Oh, nice.
And I did actually look for churches. I was on the fence about what I believed, and I looked for churches to join because you get that community aspect with it.
Right.
So if a church had been very welcoming and love bombed me, I wouldn't have thought this is love bombing and potentially high control religious environment. I would think this is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm finding my spiritual place.
Yeah.
I've been looking for a place to get hooked in, and this is the only place where that's really happened. And the only reason that I did not get sucked into a church like that is that I didn't find one where I did connect it. There was a young population. That's the only reason. But I think that we're kind of trained to want that type of community, and then you're trained to give that same love then to newcomers. You don't feel like you're perpetuating the cycle. So what did it look like then for 10 years for this to continue?
It's definitely something we've evolved with, I think, as a tool to survive, just survive, really. And we've selected for it, obviously, because people love doing this. As just like when you're a seeker and you're introduced to more and more of these things, and the engagement does seem really authentic. And I think for a lot of people, it truly is developing some real loving connections to people. It's not necessarily for everybody, but I think it really does happen. In the same way that you're gradually introduced to this, you're given more and more opportunities to be invited to things that are talked about, but that you're not a participant of. And these things are praised. These things are special. Like prayer group. Prayer group is a common one to be introduced to first. In this case, it was a meeting before the meetings. So it naturally kind of builds into your schedule, right? Why don't you come to prayer group before home church? Oh yeah, I'll come to prayer group. Like what's there to lose? Like I'm already trying to learn how to pray.
Yeah.
On my own. Why don't I pray with other people to, maybe help me pray and see what they're praying for? There's a whole bunch of reasons you can come up with to go to something like that.
Yeah. And as it becomes your social group too, I would imagine you would partially feel like you're missing out if you don't go to these things, because your other peers are kind of at the same level or progression of responsibility or leadership as you
That's
are.
Right.
You're like, if I don't go, it's not just that I'm not participating. I kind of look bad, or I'm a step below these other people.
That doesn't happen right away, but I'll get to that.
Okay.
Then there's like the, gendered, which gender and sex to them are very much the same, Bible studies. And those two are an elevated experience. They're pitched as elevated experiences. Like, hey, you've been coming here quite a bit and you seem like you're really committed. Would you want to check out our men's group? It's presented, again, very benign, but special, right? It's very much, I get to be part of this privilege of really studying the Bible. Let's get in deep. We look at the very words in their Greek. I mean, it's intense. I think it's really helped me. And it is an opportunity to connect with even more like-minded people that you can identify on this very bodily fundamental level. And that is yet another meeting that gets added to your schedule. So now I've got my 1-on-2 Bible, hangout thing before central teaching. I've got home church, right? Which is now, itself a 2-hour experience so far. So CT was like a 2 to 3 hours. So that's 5 hours of my week, right? Now I've got cell group, which in itself for the teaching or discussion is like an hour and a half. And then it's encouraged that you stay more. So then it's like a 3-hour experience. So now I'm at 8 hours.
It's like all of your social time spent.
Yeah, it gets up there, right? Oh, just wait, and that's at like a nominal level to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. As I get more and more into it, I'm listening to like William Lane Craig and other apologists. I'm listening to other people who exegete, the Bible. They look at the Greek, they look at how it interfaced with culture back then. And I'm like, this is so crazy. Like, I didn't know there was so much to this. And as I identified with it more and more, I started to take the words in the Bible more and more seriously. I like to believe that I am a person with like integrity and consistency. And I thought, okay, if I really am convinced of the words on this page, I need to do them. Jesus in Matthew 28, 18 through 20 gives, I think that's right, gives the Great Commission: go forth and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I commanded you, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And surely I'll be with you to the end of the age.
Did you memorize a lot of scripture while you were there, or was that just part of it?
Yes, there's a reason for that. And so I'm like, I should take that seriously. So I actually just kind of on my own tried to develop a relationship with a newer person. And that gets deemed as discipleship, right? Where you are using your Bible knowledge and trying to transfer it and your commitment to God, transfer that over to someone else. So that's actually the purpose of that one-on-two meeting. And eventually what it became for me, and then it was like one-on-one after a while, another person my age and I got together and we read the Bible, did the same thing as like the men's group, but on a more one-on-one personal level. And I wanted to share that with someone else. And so I tried that. I had another friend that I met at work, and they were an intern or whatever. And I brought them to the group. And there was an experience I had before, getting all the invites where I really identified my self-critical person as sinful. And I had a conversion experience at one of those home groups through the passage in First Timothy where Paul says he's like the chief of all sinners, and yet God can forgive him, right?
Like Jesus Christ came to save the sinners, of whom I am the worst.
Yes. You nailed it.
Yeah. I have it tattooed on my
No way.
That's
First
hilarious.
Timothy 15 and 16.
Yes. Well,
1:15,
it's
16,
First Timothy 1:15, but I got mine as I was leaving the church to kind of, it was more for me about the hypocrisy and just that I really do value humility and all of that. So it's a little bit twisted from the intended.
Interesting.
I didn't get it. I love that verse. It's more.
Yeah, that is amazing. Wow. But yeah, that actually kicked off my conversion experience. And something else that will happen in a group like this is that increases their identification with you and your identification with them, because you get basically showered with love. Tell me what really convinced you? Like, how is it that you believe in Jesus just like me? And lots of people will ask you that, and it becomes your ticket into these other experiences like the prayer group and the men's group, right? Because you believe, right? Now you belong in this way of thinking. You share this fundamental piece of your identity with us. So back to discipleship, right? I tried to replicate that in other people, right? One of my coworker ended up receiving Christ, having that conversion experience with me. I led them to Christ, right? That's the lingo we use for going down the Romans road and using passages like showing them that they're a sinner and that it's so easy to believe, right? And to be rescued by Jesus at the end of everything. And as I got more involved in that process, it's pitched to you, well, if you want to become a really good discipler, you should try taking some of our theological classes. And those are pitched as they're a really awesome tool, not only for discipleship, but also your personal growth. If you want to grow spiritually, you should really engage God's word. I know you're coming to the cell group. I know you come to every home church and central teaching, but I mean, this is like college level, bro. And really, after a while, it kind of is. Right. My introduction to the Bible class at Dwell was leagues better and more contentful than my college one. In fact, I would say it was very superficial, right? It gave me more of that superficial sense of Christianity as like an overview, a very loose overview of it, as opposed to, okay, here's all the books in the Bible. Here's, what the general Protestant canon is. Here's how you work through these different kinds of narratives, letters, wisdom literature. After you take, their first couple Bible classes, intro to the Bible, it's like an hour for 6 weeks. Okay. Then there's Christian growth, which is an hour for like 8 weeks. There's homework. And then there's, what do they call it? LTC. So again, insider language for leadership training class. Now this thing is more of like a collegiate, like there's like an outline. You have to write essays. Wow. You have to look at the Greek sometimes and try and see what conclusions you can reach from what this passage is saying from a Protestant view. There's 6 of those, and 2 of them at the end are reserved for people who really have shown their commitment to God and leading not only one person in discipleship, but starting to lead the men's group or women's group studies and being invited to teach at the home group. So over the years of my involvement, I had that 8 to 10 hours of commitment through all that. Now I'm adding that 1 to 2 hours of those Bible study classes, and leadership training class is 3 hours. So now it's like 15, 16 hours. I don't know how college kids get like academic excellence while they're trying to do this church. In fact, sometimes academic excellence is discouraged through something like this. Hey, Tabitha, you've been trying really hard to come to all these meetings, but I think you're being held back spiritually by working so hard at something so worldly as like success in this world. You should lay up treasures in heaven and take these classes. Right. Or, all these study groups you're doing instead of home church. I mean, that's pitching towards the world. That's not really going to fulfill you. Right. And it is a form of manipulation. Right. And it's to maintain their sense of cohesion in this group. Right. I'm so committed. What's really holding you back? Right. I became more and more involved in the intellectual pursuit, but also the social pursuit and the leadership dynamics, right, which are extolled as well. Yeah. And that's what I think is part of a drive for lots of people. It's not just the community, but there's also some pressure. Like it can start subtly, right? Internal pressure to gain that foothold that is emphasized, leading in some capacity, exercising a spiritual gift. And that's really promoted and applauded. Yay, look at you. You're really exercising a spiritual gift. Most of the time it has to be leadership. And they try to recognize some people's limits to that. But if you do make it to the top or really get recognized, I mean, you're just such a beautiful servant for the Lord. And that's also when they'll start to say, hey, it'd be really awesome of you if you started contributing to the church to really fund these classes that you're taking, right? It's actually kind of what you're obligated to do because, these people have to put food on the table. It started as 3% of my income, 5% of my income, and eventually, the 10% tithe. And you find yourself after years and years, it doesn't feel bad. It feels like this is my mission. And eventually, I kind of just got older. I had to be corralled a bit to the adult group, which is in itself given a stigma, or it used to be given a stigma that, well, you really tried hard to be a lifelong leader, a growing adult leader in this college group for these young people. But, it's your time. Mm-hmm. It's your time to do the next thing. And maybe, God will keep raising you up. You'll be doing so much for him. And so, my wife and I now are moved up to that adult group setting. And, I continue on a couple of years in that. I keep teaching. I had gotten to points at where I was teaching the men's group. I got invited to teach the college group a few times. I made it through like 4 of the leadership classes. You eventually become a fundie that doesn't like to be called a fundie. So you can see the hypocrisy and frustration people have with Christianity as a cultural, experience or caricature that a lot of people see. You hate that even. While at the same time, you are in near lockstep with a lot of the cultural values that the fundamentalists have. Trans people are broken beyond belief, right? With their sin overtaking their life. Homosexuals, they need to repent of their fleshly desires and not even consider a one-to-one love relationship. Polyamory, holy, oh my God. Pornography, oh man, throw your computer out the window right? Get a dumb phone. The Bible as inerrant? Absolutely. There is nothing wrong with this thing. Thankfully, I didn't end up like young earth creationists. They're like, well, a lot of this science actually seems to point to God through how complex and amazing it is. And it only comes from other inferences of how the world works. That's another thing where you're like, oh, we don't want to be those kind of fundies because we accept the science, right? And so that's like the cultural norms there. Well, smoking is acceptable, but your body is a temple, there is kind of some fat shaming that goes along with that, right? Your body is a temple. You can smoke cigarettes, but whoa, you're obese. We got to work on that, especially in the college group. Obese people were given these kind of not ultimatums, but relational pressure to be considering their weight and doing something about it, right? When some people, it's genetic, they can't do shit.
Yeah.
This skinny people, not usually, unless they really thought you were anorexic or something. Any sex outside of marriage? Nope. Nope, we're fundy. Can't have that. You get a lot of relational pressure to exit a premarital sex relationship. In fact, you'll get a lot of relational pressure, especially in the college group, to exit relationships with non-members because their commitment to God will be doubted. You're in here, you want to be equally yoked with someone as committed to the Lord as you are. And are they really getting that from going to a different church than you? Now that is culty, right? Because that introduces into the bite model that relational control and even information control, right? Because that's another perception and way to experience Christianity that is now foreign. It's other to us. It's frowned upon to be more progressive about the biblical text, right? So that is a way to control, information. They control your access in a way to what you're going to watch on the internet through things like Covenant Eyes, right? It could flag Game of Thrones, right? Behavioral control, with how you eat, where you spend your time, how you can even interact with people is sometimes criticized to a degree where it's like, what? Questioning leadership is discouraged, right? Because they're real servants of God. So how can you question like their decisions and stuff like that?
Manipulative.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's just the start of what makes it cult-like, right? The other thing is extolling commitment, developing this privileged in-group, right? That's culty, right? And I think what a lot of ex-members experience that is a problem are those moments where there's undue influence or double bind situations, which are very damaging, right? Emotionally scarring. It can induce trauma. So one example of a double bind is, well, I really need income. So I have to work a job. I have to work a job and maintain my schooling. But I live in this special house called a ministry house. And in order to do that, I signed a contract to be at most of the meetings. In your discipleship relationship or at a cell group, you could be sat down and it'll go something like this. Well, we notice that you're missing a lot of meetings for these worldly things. Are you too invested in your schooling? Can't you really find a way to work different shifts?
Worldly, in their mind, anything that's not active involvement with their church, is that?
Right. Yeah. Or what fits the type of clone they're trying to make of you. And that clone is the one that's in lockstep with the particular meetings and structure that they follow, especially in that college group. The other thing that's cult-like is that we are the best church. Mm-hmm. I mean, our devotion to God, apologists and prominent pastors come to our church every summer, which really soon they're going to do this thing. It's called XSI, which it's still Xenos Summer Institute, right? And they have, world-renowned apologists and preachers come. This year, they're having Gavin Ortland, who's a prominent YouTuber, Protestant, Truth. What's his name? Truth Unites, I think is his channel name. But we've had William Lane Craig. We've had Craig Keener, JP Moreland. I don't know if Frank Turek's ever showed up. Lee Strobel, right? Mike Lacona. Like I've met them, right? Because these are my apologetics like superstars, right? They're really defending my faith. Oh my God, they're at my church. Back to double binds, right? So you either take care of your real functional adult needs, or you maintain order and cohesion to this social group that is your only one at this point. And worse yet is that if you break that house covenant, your very housing is in jeopardy. What are you supposed to do? If you go this way, you're screwing up your life socially, housing wise. Or if you go that way, you are losing money, losing economic mobility, because you literally can't work and you can't excel at your schooling. It's insane. And I watched people go through that situation, and it really did frustrate me a little bit. I was not in complete lockstep with everything. I thought, well, maybe God can use people in other churches. We are the best, but maybe we're not for everyone. People didn't like that. They didn't like how I thought that we should give people latitude to get less cloned here and go to the other meetings, even if they live in the ministry house, even if they can't be super committed to our particular group. People didn't really like that either. It's like, no. The Lord planted that seed here.
Manipulative language to use.
I know, right? And it's drawing from that book that I believe is so true, and I want to be consistent with it. But what's cult-like is that there are mortal beings believing they speak for the immortal, all-powerful God. Like I've said on my channel, this thing can be a weapon.
Yeah.
And it can be leveraged at people or in people's lives to effectively control them in ways that they might not even be aware of, that they're using the book and their religion in this way that does cause the harm that I think people who post on Reddit or have contacted you about Dwell, it causes harm. Let's just leave it at that, for people's, gender identity, for people's sense of their own personalities, right? Well, they're just not, very sociable. They're not meant to lead a Bible study. And yet that's the extolled and elevated thing for the greater sense of belonging. And it leads them into these situations of cognitive dissonance, depression, and ultimately like relational abuse, because they just aren't those things. And they're being demonized for who they fundamentally are. Sometimes mental health things are stigmatized as spiritual problems. And I mean, that's horrific. Absolutely. Like I experienced a severe depression, and the first recommendations for me were to go to a spiritual Christian counselor, not official medical treatment, right? When now I'm like, get help.
A licensed therapist.
Like, if you want to get Christian counseling, by all means, go nuts, right? Do that, but please seek medical attention. When I really believed, I hated deliverance ministries. And so maybe I was not quite as fundy as some other people, but we did frown upon a lot of those, because they introduced things Pentecostally or culturally in their ministry that we could see as even worse than us. We had this imaginary line, and we had cult apologetics. We're not a cult because, and some of those were bullshit because we actually did those things.
Do you feel like they did directly address, like, this is what people might say about us and this is how we would respond to that?
Sometimes we had very specified apologetics. Oh, they just had a bad experience, right? This isn't endemic to us. We don't really need to apologize as an organization. It's just that people need to work out their Their problems. You've normalized that behavior across your groups. And it has come from like a top down, and you believe sincerely that it is love. And that's the problem. The same people who believe spanking is love, right? That's a very simple example, but we know from the data it's just not.
Yeah.
Right? We know from the data that someone's gender identity is actually a non-mental illness and fundamental part of who they are. Their sexual orientation is the same thing. There's a reason places around the world ban conversion therapy. It causes demonstrable harm to humans.
I do think spiritualizing problems that are not spiritual can lead people to stay in a group longer because they feel like it's a deficiency within themselves. Like the reason that this isn't getting cured or my depression isn't going away is because I'm not close enough to God. And I remember definitely feeling that way. I obviously wasn't well, but when I was in the church, I definitely felt that mental health issues were spiritualized. And I felt that having the joy of the Lord, for example, would cancel out depression, and me not having the joy of the Lord was the problem. And so I think it can keep you there even longer because if I leave the church, well, then where is their help? Because what they're telling you the fix is this spiritual growth. So you're not even thinking, well, I haven't tried a therapist who's licensed. I haven't tried medication. I haven't tried, peer support of people who are struggling with the same things. There are all of these other options, but they really make it seem like they're the only option.
That's exactly right. And I like to tell people who are unfamiliar with this or weren't really a part of Christianity who come across my channel and stuff that there's a self-reinforcing belief structure, right? As you're convinced that Jesus is your Messiah, well, there was a Satan that opposed him, and this Satan is capable of creating doubts in you. Doubt is actually more evidence that Christianity is true, right? So if you're doubting, Christianity is more true.
That's spiritual warfare. That's
spiritual warfare. Yeah.
And if you doubt it.
yeah, right. That's how it really did affect me socially and mentally. And eventually, when you are part of this for more than a decade and you do doubt, or you don't feel like this is working, or this is really the church you want to keep going with your family, you still love Jesus. Yeah. You still love God. But maybe something more progressive is for your family. Maybe you don't agree with, you don't want to see your children go into the college group, right? You still love everyone there. You love Jesus. You love how to study the Bible, all that stuff. But that attitude or that kind of spiritual doubt is heavily discouraged, right? Grow where you're planted. Same kind of thing as the college person that is like not demonstrating as the same kind of commitment. You're faced again with a double bind. Well, I'm in this church and it is a place where I have all these relationships, but I can see that there's some problems. On the other hand, if I leave the church, I lose all those relationships, even if, and I'm told it's a big if, I fix those problems. And so what choice do you make? They both have an incredible cost. That's extremely, painful to go through. I watched other people go through it, and unfortunately, I tried to manipulate them to stay my kind of clone because I believe that's love and I believe that's the best thing for them. But what really started me off of Christianity after about 12 years was, the pandemic, right? And the 2020 election in particular. Now, I know these are all controversial things for YouTube, but
that's okay.
Suck it up. Algorithm. Suck it up, algorithm. And I saw an inconsistency between my standard of evidence for the results of that versus Jesus.
Yeah.
And the inconsistency is this. And if the audience is kind of lost here, here's how it works. Our culture developed a spiritual legend in some, wacky pastors' lives, right? Trump is anointed by God to save this country. He really won this election, and God needs to bear the fruit of what we did to support him. And here's all of our evidence that actually happened. And they developed this person as a messianic figure. someone who can provide real deliverance as a very worldly savior. And they developed a narrative of literal false things that they are so sincerely believing that they will jeopardize everything in their life to march on the White House. It's something that happens as a group phenomenon on this really visceral level. And in an extremely short period of time, this belief grew and is basically, I would say, a religion at this point. And to dissent comes with its own costs. Well, maybe that wasn't really, stolen. Maybe this person isn't really our messianic deliverer politically, right? Though you can't express those doubts, or I feel like you can't express those doubts when you're with people that are like-minded in this way. My standard of evidence for this religion, as I was starting to see it that way, was way up here, right? I need, concrete facts. I need undisputed evidence from the officials of this thing. I don't believe these other conspiracies. I just don't believe it because I don't have the evidence. And it's spreading like wildfire amongst people which have the same standard of evidence as the disciples. Word of mouth. Trust me, bro, it was on Facebook, right? It was from my favorite news channel, right? And once I started to see those connections, right, the people were believing on word of mouth, and worse yet, we have much better ways to verify the accounts of what happened. I went on this like personal journey to listen to skeptics more, right? The YouTube algorithm, funny enough, through my doubts over the cultural narrative, put me in contact with the Telltale Atheist, who covered those wacky pastors. And that got me connected with things like The Line or Apologia and the people who interact directly with the apologetics and kind of show you, well, maybe these things aren't the arguments that you think they are. And those flaws are overlooked in Christian communities and in fact just dismissed as, oh, that's the heathen sphere. And so as I let myself listen, I mean, I really wanted to keep believing in Christianity, right? And that's not a parroting of Apologia or, other creators who say the same damn thing. I know that fear of hell that people call in and say, I'm becoming less convinced, but I'm so afraid that I am this bad person and that I deserve this burning torture, right? That I really want this beautiful place called heaven, right? But I could lose that, right, through my doubt. And that in itself is traumatic too, right? For me, in addition to that, I could lose all of my relationships. If I'm not as convinced as them, I lose all my invites. I lose my status. I lose that sense of belonging and purpose. That started to work at me. And it was really kind of devastating when I realized that I had gone through this process and it wasn't like a single thing, right? And for some people, it's not a single thing that converts them to Christianity either. What's interesting in my case is that it didn't happen through direct relationship like Christianity does. That gives it a little bit more integrity or something. Not that I'm better than anyone, but I didn't have that kind of social influence to depart from it. I'm convinced this is true. And I can't do anything about it. I don't think we really get to choose that much what we believe. Believing is the performance of what you're convinced of. Everyone sees what you appear to believe. I didn't feel like I can control that, and I like to be consistent. I eventually came to a conclusion, okay, I'm not really convinced. And then a leader approached me, this is one of the most awful experiences I've ever had as an adult. The person I had studied with so long took me on a walk and asked me, why are you even here? Maybe I'll just experience whatever I need. Some other piece of evidence will come in and I won't be able to deny the truth of it. And my family is here. what's wrong with you? I've cultivated these relationships with you and everyone around here for 12 years, in some cases, and you're telling me that I fundamentally don't belong.
It had to be so isolating, and it, with all the time commitment that you've already explained, it's like that is a lot of your socializing. So much of church is this self-help element and self-improvement, and when you leave, all of a sudden everyone's opinions just change of you, and they believe that you're this terrible person now, and realizing that, or having someone vocally express that and saying, why are you even showing up here anymore, would be so horrible, because it's hard to accept that even without people, saying it point blank.
Yeah. I forgot to mention this earlier, but we also, in the cult-like behavior, otherize people who leave. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe they just didn't like repenting. Maybe they didn't want to confess some secret sin. Maybe, they are in rebellion from the commitment to God that he would ask of them anyway. Maybe they don't like suffering, right? Mm-hmm. All these excuses and psychologizing, which are toxic. They're awful things to do. And when people leave after having done that and see it for what it is, I believe that happened to me. There are degrees to which this thing is weaponized or is not weaponized.
Yeah.
And it can manifest in things like Xenos Dwell through its use of authority. And the fact that Jesus himself seems to delegate or deputize you with that authority. Every Christian interprets that differently. And a lot of people, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of people can interpret that as, well, we really understand what love is. We really know what's best for you because God told us. And how dare you question your Lord and Savior? Right? That's the implication, right? Unless they will say it out loud sometimes. Yeah. And I recognize that on my channel that a lot of people in Dwell had it worse than me. Some of the things that happened to people in Dwell, pretty bad. Covered up scandals, yeah, there's a few. Abuser apologetics, yep. For me, I got off easy. I still say they're a high control culty group, absolutely. Do they earn the badge of like IBLP Jehovah's Witness cultiness? Depends on what happened to you. It's hard for me to do that to them as a whole, but I feel like people can get there.
Yeah.
And I believe that there are well-meaning people there. They're sincerely mistaken on what love is and how to demonstrate it.
So how did all of this, you left the church and regained?
Yeah, I just kind of stopped going. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you started your YouTube channel. So can you tell me a little bit about what that looked like? Did you have any concerns about, these other communities seeing what you were talking about as far as?
I was really of the spurned, angry, reactive person then when I started it. And I actually have an animated avatar that I used for a little bit to kind of dissociate a little bit from my face saying these things that I wanted to say. A really big, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, a really big article by the Daily Beast came out and gave testimonies of the people who were controlled and abused. And so I don't know if you could probably dig it up really easy, but there's another podcast called Let's Talk About Sects.
Okay.
That had a 2-part podcast episode about that. And then there's Spirit Watch Ministries. That's another one. They did a whole podcast series. And so with more and more of these voices coming out, I felt some ability to speak out, right? I was emboldened to speak out in a way. And that's what my channel started as. A lot of that content doesn't really exist anymore because I was giving some benefit of the doubt and I had some personal things that came up where I wanted to restart. I was motivated somewhat by that pain, but somewhat by the evidence that I felt I had for not only experiencing that abusive, manipulative culture, but doing it myself. In a way, it was a confess platform, right? And to apologize, to give that apology to people that they wouldn't hear otherwise. And I tagged the shit out of them on YouTube. And so I believe that some leaders probably caught wind of the things I was saying, and I'll just bear the consequences for that. By the way, my spouse is still a part of the church.
Really?
Yeah, and I believe
that's unlike.
Sometimes it's hard, but she, I believe, exhibits more Christ-likeness than they do a lot of the time. She is definitely not as fundy. And she's just a great partner, and it really doesn't come up a lot. We did have a big fight over, whether or not I could believe it again. I got really passionate and angry that I was like, look, if I could flip a switch today, I would be right there sitting next to you. I swear it. But I can't. I can't unsee and believe what I learned about the ancient Near Eastern culture. I can't see I can't get rid of the holes in the apologetics. If I could, I would. If I actually have some miracles that I think are good criteria to just convince me, and it's over, right? I'll delete the channel, start over, baby. Let's go, right? Yeah. And if people are curious about what those miracles are, I'll gladly do another stream about that or something, or they can comment me and I can supply it. We have a good understanding of, what we believe and why. And obviously I don't think she should be convinced, but it's not my, place to try and manipulate or pressure her to do what she's doing.
Right. And it's the system at the end of the day. There's going to be, great people and not so great people at every church. And it sounds like your partner is great. And, the leadership is really the problem. And with my channel, the goal is never to, if anyone is watching this and they're currently in Dwell, I would never want someone to watch this and feel ashamed or bad. This hopefully can bring up some questions that they can ask themselves to look into. But this is a problem with the program, with the structure, with the organization, not with individuals that are attending it.
Yeah, and I think it's the normalized treatment of the Bible as a deferred authority, and the elevation of themselves as true arbiters or dispensers or adjudicators or whatever big word you want to use. Authorize people to, use the text to cultivate clones. My channel's focus has changed from general responses to Christianity and even to call atheists to steelman shit, and to be a place for people to engage beliefs and challenge me, but, throw evidence my way if you want. I haven't really gotten too many responses from ex-members. Every once in a while, people will reach out and say, hey, we should hang out. But I find a decent amount of it to be disingenuous. Like, have they repented yet? Is basically
Can we get you back?
Yeah. If you're in an environment that you find spiritually abusive or problematic in your life, find support outside the group. Listen to people who've left the group. And there's hope. Your life isn't over when you leave this group. If you still are convinced Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, I am certain there are other churches who would love to have you. And what I would tell my younger self is one of your questions. Try not to be motivated by your feelings or what the people around you who can influence you, what they believe, and look into those things yourself, or use some restraint in just accepting something is true. Just stay in the chat and we'll get to know you. You can get to know us. And I try to be really engaged with my chat on my channel so that, you will get recognized there. I don't have a ton of subscribers. So you are, you and the people who come often are the community who support me, who engage me, who criticize me, and help me grow as a person and a creator. So go over and, check out my channel. I think it's at Niddy 2.0. That's about it. Thank you so much for letting me talk so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. All right, thank you guys so much for watching that interview. And I just want to say thank you again to Nick or Niddy on YouTube. And yeah, just thank you so much for being willing to share your story. I actually did this interview a while ago, but because of my health issues that have come up, I just kind of delayed editing some interviews that I had. You're so patient with me and understanding, and I just really appreciate that. And please, I hope that you guys can give him some love. Please share your experience as well. And if you've been in Dwell or Xenos, I would love to hear about it. Have you escaped Xenos or Dwell? Do you know more resources than what I've already shared? I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Please like this video if you made it this far. Comment. You can always just comment to Dove if you want to support but don't know what to say. I'll always comment back a white heart. I do try to respond to as many of you guys as I can, so if you comment, there's a good chance that I will get back to you. Please subscribe or double check to make sure that you're subscribed already if you're not. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
So after he did you so wrong, what made you stay?
Love.
Yeah.
The Bible talks about how love is patient.
Yes.
Love is kind.
Come on.
Love is felt most when it's genuine.
My God.
And I had to think to myself, what type of wife would I be?
Speak on it. Speak on it.
If I didn't love my husband in his darkest days. Yeah. And I understand he was a hoe, and he was trying to get over that, but who would I be if I wasn't being genuine in his time of needing love?
See, you're that Proverbs 31 that everyone's talking about.
Exactly. And I know y'all don't understand. But see,
the shade.
But the funny thing is, I remember one day he was on his way to see one of his hoes.
Ooh.
And he looked me in the face and he said, he hated me.
No.
And you know what? I said, you don't hate me.
Ooh.
You don't hate me. You hate what I represent.
Wow.
As a wife. You hate me because I love you.
Clock it.
And you said I'm not to type, and you're still grieving, but that don't matter because I'm genuine. I'm loved.
See, oftentimes like men don't feel like they're enough, so they do. It's called self-sabotage. And you saw right through that.
Yes, amen.
That's a real woman right there. So at what point did it turn around? Did it start getting better for you?
He relapsed a few times, and I just had to stick it out. I had to be a Proverbs 31 woman.
My God.
And it was tough.
Yeah.
It was so tough because I had to stick it out because y'all don't know what real love is.
They don't know. See, they think it's the Instagram posts and the fights overseas, but this is the real work of a marriage. So there's a story. I remember he's a sermon, and it was about the prodigal son, but he said he took a trip to Florida and he was gone for a few weeks. And can you speak on that?
Yeah, so this was actually after he said he hated me. He left, and
my God.
I told him that I love you and I pray for you.
Yeah.
And he left for a few weeks, and I prayed and
Hit the road, Jack.
Yes. That's funny. And I prayed and I prayed.
Yeah.
And so after about 6 weeks, it wasn't 3, it was actually 6. Yeah, it was 6 weeks. And I was a praying woman. A praying woman.
That's powerful.
That's
powerful.
And so he came back.
So why'd you let him back?
Well, it just goes back to being patient.
Love.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I just wanted to show him that, the Proverbs 31 woman in me, was what he needed.
Ladies, take notes. You don't just give up on love.
Amen.
You stick it out. And the significance of the 6, if I'm correctly, God created the world in 6 and rest on the 7th.
Amen.
And it's powerful and unique and significant how he came back on that 6th day when his world was complete.
Yes.
And he came back and rested with you.
Yes.
In these last 7 years.
Yes.
The number of completion.
Number of completion.
My God.
Yes.